Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Support the broadcast. It's important that you do that so I can remain on these airwaves. Best way to do that, become a paid subscriber on the Substack. You can do that monthly, a little over $9 a month or a little over $90 a year. We do private weekly group Zoom chats with paid subscribers to shoot the breeze on current events. I do a weekly news wrap up for paid subscribers only. And sometimes we bring back past podcast guests to chat, to do a live Q&A with paid subscribers. You can also donate, buy me a coffee, send pesos through Wise or Donor Box. You can purchase a consult if you want to chat with me about anything. And our sponsor this month is Mikkel Thorup's Expat Money Summit, taking place October 7th to the 11th online, virtually. It's for free. So you can click the link in the description to sign up and register for the free event. If you can't catch the first 24 hours of each day where it's streamed for free, you do have to purchase the VIP upgrade. And if you use the promo code EMPIRE, you get $100 off. Most of the headline speakers have been guests on this podcast: Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Mark Faber, and so forth. I am participating in one of the VIP panels as well to talk World War III. And do check out our affiliates, Legal Shield, Wise Wolf Gold, Easy DNS, Above Phone, and leave a podcast review. Returning to the transmission is Vietnam veteran investor, author Bob Moriarty of 321gold.com. How is life, Bob?
Life is good, but I got some bad news about that conference in October.
Yes?
The World War may be scheduled in 2 weeks.
Well, it's online, so hopefully, while the war is going on, people can watch the Expat Money Summit. But let's start off, shooting right out of the gates. What are these rumblings of war?
Okay, let me explain my background so your listeners get it. I enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1964, a week after I turned 18. I went through boot camp in San Diego. While I was at the rifle range, they came through and said, anybody that would like to apply for flight training, if you got 2 years of college and you could pass a flight physical, okay, we'll consider you for flight training. And privates at the time made $75, and second lieutenants with flight pay made $405. And I said, let me think, which would I rather do? So I got into flight training, but the crazy thing is, as much as I love flying, I got into flight training because of the pay. So I went through flight training, finished in December of 1966, went to an F-4 squadron in Cherry Point, North Carolina in January of 67. And that spring, I had ulcers when I was visiting a friend of mine in San Diego. So they put me in the hospital. They operated and cut 2/3 of my stomach out. And I was grounded for 6 months. So my squadron had to do something with me, but I couldn't fly as pilot in command of the F-4, so they sent me to every school they could. So in the summer of 1967, I went through the Army Basic Intelligence course. I think it's an 8-week course in Fort Holabird, Maryland. So I've been a trained intelligence officer. That's not a spook kind of intelligence officer. That's you keep records and show videos and do things. You disseminate information rather than collect information. I go to Vietnam in 1968, and I was there for 20 months, and I was the squadron intelligence officer. I have seen probably 1,000 intelligence reports of one kind or another. Now, I will say, I think I have the best readers on the web because they come to me with very real problems and they give me good information. And strange enough, anybody out there, if you think I'm lying to you, email anybody else in the business and ask them a question. If you email me you will get a response. You may email anybody else, you won't get a response. So about 2 weeks ago, I got a very interesting email from a fellow who had been an intelligence professional for 40 years. He's retired. And based on open source information, he said the timing is perfect for China to invade Taiwan the weekend of the 20th through the 22nd of September. I will say, based on my experience in combat, that the intelligence report is real and it reads true. And I think there's somewhere between a 30 and 75% probability of it actually happening. Now, the interesting thing is that China has shown a lot of belligerence lately that is unusual for China. Okay, Jake Sullivan went over there for a meeting, and basically they told him to pound sand. Okay, I think they had a taxi driver meet him at the airport, but he was deliberately insulted, and the Chinese don't do that. Okay. And China has flown military aircraft into the Japanese ADIS, which is a message to the Japanese, like, if we do something, you need to stay out. So I think there is an excellent chance that we could see an invasion of Taiwan in 2 weeks. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. I wrote him back and I said, look, there's something happening on the 18th that could certainly affect that. And that's the Trump sentencing in the fraud case in New York City. The case, it's probably the most obscene judicial action in American history. Donald Trump was essentially convicted of 34 counts of paying off hooker. Now, I got a real problem with that. If they make it illegal to pay off hookers, we're all in trouble. Okay, what do we do then? The case was total fraud from the get-go. It should have never been filed. It was a joke. It was rigged. It was worse than anything the Nazis or the communists ever did. He's up for sentencing on the 18th. If the judge sentenced him to prison and lead him off in handcuffs, it will be the equivalent of the Confederates firing on Fort Sumter in April of 1861. It will lead to a civil war. Eventually, the case will be overturned once a real court hears it. However, it could totally change things in the United States overnight, cause total chaos. So if you add that happening on the 18th with the possibility of the Chinese invading Taiwan on the 20th to the 22nd, you have the potential for absolute total chaos. Now, you and I were talking off camera. The time frame between now and the election is the scariest 2 months probably in world history. The deep state has made it absolutely clear, including an attempted assassination against Donald Trump, that they're terrified of Trump and they're going to do everything in their power to make sure he isn't elected. And the best way to make sure he's not going to be elected is to not hold an election. So we're in for some interesting times, and it's a really good time to be prepared. Now, of the 1,000 intelligence reports that I read, 30 to 75% of them may have been accurate, but 70 to 25% of them were total nonsense. So I'm not saying China is absolutely going to invade Taiwan. I'm saying there it's a high possibility. that China will invade. Now, the fellow who wrote the report, I went back to him. I talked to him about the Trump sentencing. He said, yeah, that's certainly an interesting factor. And I said, well, look, you're writing about China, but you haven't said anything about Russia. And China, Russia, and Iran are all in bed right now. So anything that China does, Russia's certainly going to be involved. And he said, well, I can't talk about that because Russia was my bailiwick, and I have NDAs signed that says I can't even mention the word Russia. So I'm saying this is not China by itself. It would be China, Iran, Russia, and even potentially North Korea. NATO and the United States and Israel have made it crystal clear they want World War III. They were the aggressors. They've always been the aggressors. And there's an excellent chance they're going to get exactly what they're asking for. And they're going to get it good and hard.
I had back in February of 2022, I had on Jeff Nyquist, who predicted Russia invading Ukraine a few weeks later, and that happened. And so now I'm getting freaked out where you're, with the good info, predicting China invading Taiwan. And so I guess we'll see what happens. But there are, as you outlined, a number of strange occurrences. For example, the belligerents, as you were saying, I read that article, I shared it on my feeds a few weeks back, Sullivan being in China and the Chinese general confronting Sullivan and basically telling him, we're going to take Taiwan. So that's another sign what's happening in the West. And that plays to that theory that the Chinese are influencing the Democratic Party, right? That money is going to the Democratic Party. And so the Dems are creating this lawfare against Trump, this civil war scenario where, it basically, it would make difficult for America to respond, given the domestic situation, to what's happening abroad. And then on top of that, if you have other people moving, Korea, Russia, Iran, it's really a worst case scenario. And so how would you see any of this then playing out? And, if it's not soon, China taking Taiwan, it could be next year or in 2 years or 3 or 4, whatever. How would you see then? Would we be off to the races then? Would this be a World War III scenario, or would there be a instance where China takes Taiwan, but the U.S. does not respond so forcefully?
James Rickards was part of the deep state. He's participated in half a dozen war games. And when they war gamed China and Russia or China against the U.S. and NATO, in 100% of the cases, it went nuclear. Now, you and I were talking a few minutes ago off camera again about the fact that Iran has sat there and watched their own diplomats and their own people being assassinated by Israel and ignoring it, and Russia allowing red line after red line after red line to be crossed, and the Chinese general actually saying, we are going to take Taiwan. What Americans don't know, and the mainstream media will never tell you this, the official position of the United States is that Taiwan is part of China. Okay, so I'm not saying you have two totally different countries with opposing views. You've got one country, okay, with two different political systems. If Taiwan had any sense whatsoever to prevent World War III, it would absolutely make sense for them to sit down with the Chinese and say, okay, we are part of China. How can we do this in a reasonable manner? It's like Brexit. Of course, I'm living in the south of France now. Brexit was handled so poorly. I approve of the UK exiting the EU. But the problem is France was belligerent, the UK was belligerent, and instead of saying, well, let's work together and see if we can work this out, they said, we're going to fight this. Taiwan is part of China. I didn't make that up. I don't particularly care. And I don't see any problem with China saying, okay, we want to administer Taiwan. That's always been the American position. So who am I to disagree? But the danger is we're not hearing anything from Russia. We're not hearing anything from Iran. Again, off camera, you and I were talking, the attack by Iran on Israel in April was a total 100% victory for Iran. They proved they could attack Israel anytime they wanted to, and they could hit the targets that they intended to hit. Because I was in the military and I spent a lot of time in combat, I would not mess with the Chinese. I would not mess with the Iranians, and I would certainly not mess with the Russians. And we're doing all three of those at the same time. That is as close to insanity as anything I've seen in my life.
On that topic of weakness, I have guests with different views, and sometimes I like to put everything on the table and then figure things out. Let listeners figure things out themselves. I'm not telling people necessarily what to believe. And I trigger everyone, which is fantastic. Great. I don't care. When I have on people who talk about the Russia is weak, I get all these comments. When I talk about Russia is strong and BRICS and multipolarity, there's some truth in everything. But this idea that Russia is taking it on the chin in Iran, you mentioned something interesting. Who created the game of chess? The Persians. And if you think about it, if we look back at history, the Russians always ended up victorious against Napoleon, against Hitler, Barbarossa, and all of that. And so they play this long. When things really come down to the wire, Russia just puts things to a halt. And so I think they also know that history where they don't want to jump the gun, because when the show starts, it's going to be horrible. Tens of millions of people dying. And so they understand that better than the West, which has not suffered like, peoples like the Russians and others. And so just any final thought on this idea that, Lavrov and Putin, and they're weak, and NATO just keeps smashing them?
Oh, exactly the opposite is true. You just said something incorrect. You said that the West has not been attacked. What you should have said is the West has not been attacked yet. The Russians lost 27 million people in World War II. Putin had an older brother who was killed. The war is absolutely real to Putin. It's absolutely real to the Russian people. And they do not fight wars to fight wars. They fight wars to win. The United States lost, I think, 425,000 people in World War II. Now, you compare that to the Russians. The Russians lost about 55 times as many people. Do not mess with the Russians. The Russians are grade A badasses, and they will win the war. Joe Biden is not Napoleon, and Kamala Harris is not Adolf Hitler. And the history of the United States going all the way back to World War II is we lose every war we fight in. And Americans say, no, we won World War II. No, we didn't. The Russians killed 80% of the Germans, okay? What happened in D-Day and the invasion of Western Europe, that was a sideshow. The Russians won that war, and they won it at a great cost to themselves. Now, it's like Israel in Gaza. They don't make any bones about it. We want to murder all 2 million people. They're not hiding it. The United States has made it crystal clear. We want to break Russia up into little pieces. It is an existential battle for the Russians, and it's a game for the Americans. And when you get into that kind of situation, you are going to lose. If it goes nuclear, I think it'll be over in one day, and we're going to lose.
Putin was out in Sukhbatr Square in Ulaanbaatar, the city of the Red Hero, Mongolia. I stood there some 18 years ago. Those were my stomping grounds for a while, Mongolia. And Mongolia did not arrest Putin and send him off to the Hague for Brussels and Washington. Are there any other theaters of war, or when it comes to war, looking around the world, that are important for you, or thoughts on, what's happening with Ukraine, Russia? It seems like the West is giving less money to Zelensky for his cocaine habit. No, I don't know. Any thoughts on the other areas of interest?
Well, it's the U.S. and supplying money to Zelensky. It's one of those good news, bad news stories. The U.S. has agreed not to give him so much money for cocaine, but on the other hand, they've made Hunter Biden the drug czar for the United States because of his experience.
Isn't there something? What's going on with Hunter? He got.
No, he pled guilty to cheating on his taxes.
Really, just a slap on the wrist. Nothing happened.
Well, no. Wait a minute. There won't be any slap on the wrist. Who's daddy?
Joe, right? Yeah.
Oh, God, Hunter, you had a really bad day. They sentenced you to 500 years in prison. Oops, I'll give you a pardon. Don't do that again. I've told you in the past. It's crazy. The only reason that Joe Biden is still the president of the United States, he's like Netanyahu. He's going to stick around in office as long as possible to make sure he and his family don't go to prison.
And speaking of prison, to get your then thoughts, again, what's happening with the deep state in America, the DOJ, the FBI, as of late, the DOJ is coming after podcasters, American podcasters, Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, I forget all the other names, saying they took Tenet Media, they took 10 million from, unwittingly, they took 10 million from some RT operation. And I've been talking about this since July. And so I'm not crazy. Like this proves, in July, I've been saying an anonymous website started doing write-ups on other content creators, alternative media. They did an article on me. They were on Twitter tweeting all this stuff, putting photos of me, Geopolitics and Empire, my guests, just because I talked to some in the Russian sphere. I'm a crypto communist Russian agent, and this was a spook cutout website. I said that from the very beginning. This is not some crazy person. This is American deep state, anonymous website. Robert Barnes, just this morning, just the last few days, he's been saying the same thing. He just said this morning, he said, if you were a spook operation that had confidence you wouldn't get caught, then you'd reach out to people like me. So he's basically saying these were spook operations. And so that was in July. This was happening to other people. And now, New York Times just put out a piece a few weeks ago saying, talking about U.S. government going after Americans who are unwittingly or wittingly being influenced by Russia. So there's that. There's what's happening with the Trump sentencing. So your further thoughts, domestically, what's going on?
Well, actually, I'm really hurt.
What?
I'm hurt. Why do you get all the attention? I was one of the first guys coming out about COVID. I said that Bill Gates and Fauci belonged in prison. Do I get any credit? No. Does the deep state come after me? No. Do they even mention my name? No. You get all the credit. I look like a twit.
Well, be careful what you ask for. I just want to live a simple life here in Mexico, and
there is a great advantage to being 78. What are they going to do? Shave your head and send you to Vietnam?
They'll send you to Taiwan. No.
Taiwan's going to be a sheet of glass 4 inches thick.
So what do you make of what this going after? It does seem scraping the bottom of the barrel. I mean, are things going so bad for the deep state that they have to come after podcasters?
Excuse me? Did you ask that question? Is that like, are we playing some kind of game of Trivial Pursuit? Is the deep state losing? Let me think about that for just a minute. Okay. Yeah, exactly. This is all predicted in the fourth turning. Okay. But what everybody forgets is while the fourth turning predicted a move to totalitarian government, which we absolutely have seen all over the world, it also says that there's a counter movement back to freedom. And the deep state doesn't realize it, but their actions prove they know they're losing. It's like Zelensky, okay? He the coke is worn off, and he's finally woken up to the fact, I get my ass kicked. I had 1 million Ukrainians killed. I have these fake military maneuvers that backfire in my face. And, I actually lost the war 2 years ago. And my response is, well, no shit. Okay. I mean, I think even Poland has woken up to the fact that it's not worth throwing any more money into its coke habit. What happened in Ukraine was criminal. I hope that we survived long enough for there to be war crimes trials, because there was no reason whatsoever for that war to take place. The United States has no interest in it. NATO has no interest in it. I'll give you one better. Name one of the 2 latest countries to join NATO.
I don't know. Wasn't it Finland or somewhere up there?
One more.
Sweden?
Sweden. Bingo. Very good. Okay. Here's the deal. Sweden sent a bunch of people to Ukraine to train the Ukrainians how to use their weapons and their communication system. So what did the Russians do?
Did they take him out?
Kaboom. Okay. So Sweden is rethinking, those guys play serious over there. Maybe we screwed up. And I'm hoping they have to explain to the mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters of those dozens of Swedes who were killed what exactly they died for. Okay. I've been in war. I know all about stupid wars. The Ukrainian war is easily the stupidest war I've ever heard. In December of 2021, what did Putin ask of NATO and the United States?
Well, not to expand, yeah.
Well, and that's kind of it. They said Putin said we want secure borders. Well, I was around in 1962. Okay, at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, what did John F. Kennedy want?
Right, out of Cuba, the missiles.
He wanted secure borders. Yeah. Okay, and this gets even better. And I'll ask you a real good trick question. See how good your history is. What did Russia agree to, and what did the United States agree to at the Cuban Missile Crisis?
For the Americans to pull their stuff out of Turkey, yeah.
Bingo, you hit it. Okay, now no Americans know that because they don't know any history whatsoever. But while that was sold as an American victory, John F. Kennedy went to Khrushchev and said, look, we want secure borders and we're willing to go to war to get it. And Khrushchev said, what a coincidence. We want the same thing. What? I got an idea. We'll take the missiles out of Cuba. You take the missiles out of Turkey. How does that sound? JFK said, God, great idea. All Putin ever wanted was secure borders. And I absolutely, in a heartbeat, believe that all countries have a right to secure borders. This war is about NATO expansion, and NATO is not a self-defense force. NATO is an aggressive anti organization. If you don't believe that, you can go to Libya and go to the market and buy a slave, thanks to NATO and the United States.
That's something that I can't shut up about, being in my skin in the game. I'm an American and I'm a European citizen. This is my supposed government, and NATO is unhinged. And this lie where they pretend to be this dove, peaceful, defensive force when they're this imperial, aggressive force that wants to take over the world. I did an interview not long ago, and I wrote a short article for the Substack on NATO. We're saying it wants total global domination because there's articles from these cutout think tanks, Atlantic Council, NATO's brain. They said Mexico should join NATO. They said Latin America, Colombia, Argentina are already global partners. They're already training Colombian special forces to be interoperable with NATO forces. General Stavridis in Bloomberg in April this year said, look, we should just have the Asian countries directly join NATO, Thailand, Singapore. And then I found one piece that said, look, NATO is no longer North Atlantic. We need to rename it New Alliance Treaty Organization. So it's like, who are they? There's nowhere to defend from. Like you said, they want to take over the planet. It's absolutely obscene.
You just hit on something that's very important, and I've mentioned this a lot in the past. There is a global conflict going on between the debt-based system of the West that is collapsing. It is collapsing every day. Okay, we were going to mention NVIDIA. NVIDIA had the biggest drop in one day in U.S., actually in world stock market history. It dropped $300 billion in one day, and that was $300 billion real money. The West is collapsing, okay? And it's like a scorpion dying. As a scorpion dies, it tries to sting everything around it, okay? The West is collapsing, and BRICS, okay, is going to take over. The center of influence has shifted from Europe, which is Europe's going to end up being Disney World for the Russians, the Chinese, and the Indians. Okay, Europe, due to the sanctions, which were absolutely stupid of Europe to do, Germany destroyed their economy. The Chancellor of Germany approved Biden blowing up Nord Stream. I got an idea. Why don't I blow up Nord Stream, and then 2 years from now, 69% of German companies can be on the verge of bankruptcy and be shifting operations outside of Germany. What a wonderful idea. What won't I teach the voters who to vote for? We're in the insane period. We got 2 months of extreme danger and 5 months of serious danger.
And just, on the economic front, the system is broken. It's not just reading articles, like in the real world. And just an example here in Mexico, I mentioned this recently, talking to a neighbor, the homes in their neighborhood, in the last 10 years, the homes value have tripled in price. In 10 years, tripled. If I go back down the street where I used to work at the top, the MIT globalist, the Yale of Mexico, the Tec de Monterrey, where I used to teach. If I go back there to work, the wage I will get will be less than what I got 10 years ago. So the wage is going to be less. Housing has tripled. This is insane. Like, the system is completely broken. In Croatia, I was just an article yesterday in Croatia. It says in the last 4 years, food prices have gone up almost 40%. It's just They're introducing property tax in Croatia. I mean, you just see in the U.S. inflation, everything is just they're wiping out the middle class. The system is breaking, as you said, Nvidia. So, any other thoughts on the economy and what we can expect? Are banks going to start collapsing? Gold. I read recently we got the first time that a gold bar achieved the worth of $1 million. Further thoughts there?
Well, actually, and because I run a gold site, obviously it's something I'm familiar with. The 400-ounce gold bar at $2,500 an ounce is $1 million. It is as simple as you cannot have an honest economy without honest money. On the 18th, oh, God, I forgot that. On the 18th, the Fed is going to lower interest rates. Now, the amazing thing is the theory was we're going to raise interest rates until we kill inflation. They haven't killed inflation. They fed inflation, okay? The Dow Jones is down 400 points today. NVIDIA continues down. We have destroyed the debt-based system of the West, and the only question is how many people are going to die as a result. I wish we had real leadership in the West, and frankly, I don't see it. And while I disagree with some of the things the Russians have done, Lavrov and Putin and the Chinese are the only people who have advocated peace. Okay. The Russians were not the aggressors in Ukraine. NATO was the aggressor. And the United States brags about Victoria Nuland spent $5 billion of American taxpayer money overthrowing the legally voted government in Ukraine. So we're collapsing, and the question is, who are we going to take with us on the way down? And it's certainly what's going on in the Middle East. We should talk about it. We've got a hot spot in Ukraine that could easily go nuclear. We've got a hot spot on the Lebanon border. Hezbollah has 150,000 rockets and missiles that could hit Israel. They could flatten Israel. We've got a hot spot in Gaza. We've got a hot spot in the West Bank. We've got a hot spot in Yemen, where the Houthis are sinking a ship every couple of days. We need peace and we need sanity, but to get that, you have to have leadership, and to get that, you've got to have an honest financial system. Without an honest money, you cannot have an honest financial system. So the question is, how bad is it going to get? And my answer is probably pretty bad.
Yeah, and the Israelis are prepared to use nukes as well. They've made that. Some of them have made those statements. Hang on. They're prepared to use American nukes. The Israelis are trying to force the United States into nuking Damascus and Tehran. The Israelis want the United States to fight the war for them, which is what they always do. We I think before hitting the recorder, we were talking briefly about Cobra Commander Klaus Schwab and his horribly written books. As of late, there's not been much news. He stepped down, I think, from WEF. But, in the background, I know we don't talk about this much, but you still see them working behind the scenes on these projects. 2 weeks ago, the Mexican government, I've never seen this before, and on their official Twitter account of one organ of the Mexican government, they officially announced Mexico City they're going to start making into a 15-minute city. Another mayor in another state on his Twitter account said, we're creating a 15-minute city. And so I have a feeling, I had a guest on recently, Warwick Powell, who works in the tech sector, and he says this stuff, he uses the term slippage, that they can never perfectly implement a lot of this technological stuff. Do you have any thoughts on the dreams of these Davos technocrats to implement this global technological control grid?
In my books, I talk about how ordinary people of ordinary intelligence and ordinary knowledge can come to the right conclusion if they will learn to ask the right question. I can prove to you in one sentence how obscene the world is today and how corrupt and how insane. Fauci, who pushed the shots harder than anybody, claims to have taken 6 COVID shots. And he's come down with COVID 3 times. Now, wouldn't somebody say, wait a minute, okay, if that shot did something, why didn't it have any effect on you? The World Economic Forum is trying to do something. The oligarchs have been trying to do this for probably 3,000 years, okay? Because of their because of their money, and because of their power, they want to rule the world. You can pick up any history book in the world, and it says nothing about the brilliance of the leaders. It talks about how stupid the leaders are and how they screwed up time and time and time and time again. You cannot have leadership from the top down. It has never worked in history. And they're saying, well, fuck, we got all this money. Shouldn't we be making the rules? Wait a minute, you people are stupid. Okay. Bill Gates, okay, who was the richest man in the world for a long time, has been buying up forest land. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, he's been buying up all that stuff, yeah.
And what's he doing with it? What's he doing with the trees?
Right, he's cutting them down.
And doing what?
Was it to sequester carbon or throw up solar panels or something?
No, worse. He's cutting the trees down and he's burying them to prevent CO2. Now, as rich as Bill Gates is, he's stupid. Because trees take CO2, which is carbon and oxygen. They turn the carbon into lumber and they release the oxygen. Okay, so trees do exactly the opposite of what Bill Gates is doing. Now, CO2 actually is probably one of the most important gases for human beings, for all plant life. It's similar to bees. No CO2, no humans. No bees, no humans. These people are truly stupid. Having lots and lots of dollars is not the same thing as having lots and lots of cents.
But it could be beyond stupidity. I mean, it could be just intentional malevolence where they're in some death cult and they just want to destroy.
No, he's stupid. His whole vaccine thing is the same theory as what he did with software. Now, nobody knows this, but Bill Gates did not actually create DOS, okay? He was in the software business, but he actually had a basic assembler language compiler. So he was in the computer business and in a very minor way. When IBM came to him and said, we want to introduce you, we want you to introduce us to the best operating system in the world, he sent them to the guy that was running, let me think of the Intergalactic Digital Research, okay, which will give you an idea of how goofy the industry was back then. But Digital Research had the best operating system on the market. So the guys tap on the door of Digital Research, and a woman comes to the door, and IBM says, look, we're from IBM, we want to talk to your husband about business. And she said, well, he's out flying an airplane right now. We didn't know you were coming. And they said, well, we want you to sign this NDA. We can't even talk to you without signing the NDA. And she said, well, what's this about? And they said, we're not going to tell you. And she said, well, booger off. Okay. So IBM went back to Bill Gates and said, we didn't have any success with digital research. What do we do now? And Bill Gates said, well, there's this operating system called DOS that a friend of mine owns in Seattle. And maybe you'd like to look at that. So Bill Gates got on a flight, flew to Seattle, bought DOS for $75,000, went back and talked to IBM and said, oh, by the way, I own DOS now. How about them apples? I've been in computers since 1967. Okay, I've been around computers for a long, long time. DOS and Windows are the worst operating system I have ever used. I hate it. I use Microsoft Office, okay, on my Macintosh, and I hate it. It's buggy, it's complex, and frankly, it doesn't work. Bill Gates was successful at convincing people to buy his piece of crap operating system and software, but the guy doesn't have the sense God gave a goose. Cutting down trees to prevent CO2 is just plain stupid. This whole thing about vaccines, he got kicked out of India and he got kicked out of Africa because his were killing people. Okay. The COVID that I said I was the first person in the world to say they would never work for the very simple reason that viruses mutate. When you take a flu shot, okay, it is designed to cure last year's flu, not this year's flu. And the reason there's no vaccine for the common cold is there's too many variations of the common cold. So we're doing a lot of things. We're repeating the same mistakes again and again and again and again. But you, and believe it or not, even Elon Musk and even the guy running Telegraph are trying to say we need to change things. We need to make it better. What we're doing now isn't working, and we need to go to something that is working. I believe the oligarchs in the World Economic Forum and the Club of Rome, I believe they're going to fail, just as they have every time in history, but it could get very bloody between now and then.
You mentioned Club of Rome. This is funny. Just yesterday on my LinkedIn profile, it tells you sometimes who was looking at your profile. And I kid you not, I've got a screenshot. Someone at the Club of Rome was looking at my LinkedIn profile. It said Club of Rome company where one of your searchers works. And so that's interesting.
Pays to advertise.
Yeah. I guess one of my final questions is any pointers, just simple stuff on what people should do to weather this coming storm. I always say it's common sense, basically. Someone was asking me for a free consultation the other day, and I can't do that. Sometimes I don't even have enough time to spend with my kids and family. And so, but I was just saying that it's a lot of these solutions are just common sense. And I always cite Teddy Roosevelt: do what you can with what you got where you're at, form a good network, try to be independent, right? Food, water, and anything, gold, I think, will preserve a lot of your purchasing power. Any thoughts on what people can do?
Well, you just answered it. I thought you were going to ask me a question. You just answered my question. We are at an exceptionally dangerous period in history where insane people are trying to rule the world. It would be a good time to have 6 months' food. It would be a good time to keep your vehicle gassed up. It would be a good time to have access to cash. And it would probably be a good time to have an extra box or two of ammo.
Good advice. Where are the best places people can go to find your stuff, Bob?
321gold.com and 321energy.com. And I'm glad you opened that up. I haven't pitched my books in the longest time. I am a very unusual writer. I am not the best writer in the world. However, I have a very broad span, from some very funny short fiction to serious books about war, serious books about some of my experiences and a couple of books on investing. You can go to Amazon, and there are some great books there, including one about Kamala Harris and her word salad. And I'm about to do a major email marketing. Kamala Harris, when you actually listen to her words, she's nutty.
That's why I can't listen to that stuff anymore. I've got your books as well, some in Kindle, some in physical form. So I highly recommend them. And I guess we'll get an update from you if the internet doesn't go down, or in the middle of World War III, we'll get our next update. I hope not. So thanks, Bob.
Yeah, well, the bad news is the updates in the future are going to be written with a chisel and a hammer on rocks.